Tonight, prepare to embark on a journey far beyond the confines of a conventional history lesson. We delve into the profound aftermath of the Black Death, an era that witnessed one of humanity's most breathtaking transformations. Imagine a continent, Europe itself, compelled to rise phoenix-like from its own ashes, orchestrating a monumental reconstruction from the very foundations up. Should these narratives captivate your imagination, a simple like or subscription would be profoundly appreciated, enabling more to discover these crucial insights. I am eager to understand the global reach of our shared exploration. Therefore, I urge you to share your location and local time in the comments. It remains endlessly fascinating to comprehend the worldwide communion of listeners engaging with these accounts as they drift into slumber. Now, allow yourself to settle into a sanctuary of comfort. Inhale slowly, deliberately, letting your very being surrender to the solace of your surroundings. We are about to transport ourselves to the year 1453, and by the conclusion of this odyssey, you will undoubtedly harbor a profound appreciation for the simple luxury of your present day. Mattress, congratulations are in order, for you have just awoken in England, precisely 35 years after the Black Death unleashed an unparalleled devastation across Europe. The immediate triumph is clear. You have survived. Yet, a stark reality confronts you. The world you once knew has irrevocably vanished. As your eyes reluctantly open, it is not what you perceive that first grips you, but rather the haunting absence of sound. No longer does the village square hum with the morning's vibrant rhythm. The joyous echoes of children at play are conspicuously absent from the streets. The insistent clang of the blacksmith's hammer no longer punctuates the dawn. Only silence remains, a profound, unnatural quietude that settles like a shroud over places where vibrant life once teemed. Your muscles protest with a deep, pervasive ache, a testament to the ceaseless toil that now defines existence. Indeed, every soul remaining is forced to labor beyond the body's natural limits. There is simply no alternative. As you shift, the rough texture of your straw mattress reminds you of a curious, hard-won advancement. Before the plague, serfs endured the bare earth, perhaps with only meager rags for warmth. But now, with half the population tragically lost, an unexpected abundance of resources has emerged. Is it not truly remarkable how such devastation can paradoxically redistribute wealth and comfort? You rise slowly, allowing your vision to acclimate to the muted light filtering through the single modest window. This dwelling, notably larger than your childhood home, once belonged to the village miller and his entire family, all six tragically. Claimed within a single week in 1348, their remains, along with countless others, were interred in the churchyard, necessitating the excavation of mass graves. You strive to suppress these grim recollections. The floorboards creak beneath your weight. Actual wooden planks, a luxury unimaginable when packed dirt was the norm. You inherited far more than just this house when the plague completed its grim work. A chest in the corner contains garments that fit, a proper cooking pot hangs over the hearth, and even a pewter cup, once an exclusive mark of the affluent merchant class, is now yours. How strangely calamities possess the power to reallocate wealth, though never in a manner one would willingly choose. You don your tunic, its wool soft against your skin, a vast improvement over the coarse hemp of former days. It is a comforting sensation, yet an unsettling whisper persists in your mind. This garment once adorned someone who succumbed, choking on their own blood. You endeavor to banish this thought. Outside, your breath condenses into fleeting clouds in the crisp morning air. September in England always carried a chill, but now it feels profoundly colder. Perhaps it is the diminished presence of human warmth in the world, or perhaps, after bearing witness to such overwhelming death, everything simply feels a little more stark. The village of Little Wickham now resembles a shattered smile, its houses standing empty, doors agape like vacant jaws, gardens overrun, fences in disrepair. In the distance, fields that should be bursting with golden grain lie brown and fallow, lacking the hands to bring in the harvest. Before the plague, this village housed perhaps 200 souls. Now, on a fortunate day, only 60 remain. Your stomach growls, a sharp, insistent reminder of life's unwavering demands. This is the truth rarely spoken about surviving disaster. Hunger persists. Life, stubbornly, endures even when all logic dictates it should not. You walk towards the village center, passing the well, once a bustling hub of gossip and camaraderie. The wooden bucket hangs, its rope frayed, the water level low. Maintenance, it seems everything revolves around it now. There are simply insufficient hands to sustain the old ways. The baker's shop remains shuttered, as it has been for 3 years since Thomas the baker, his wife, and 2 sons perished. His apprentice attempted to carry on, but bread-making is an intricate craft, and his dense loaves were, to put it kindly, fit more for construction than consumption. Nowadays, people bake their own bread, or at least attempt to. A vast reservoir of practical knowledge, passed down through generations, vanished with the plague. Gone, simply gone. You detect the scent of wood smoke drifting from the manor house, Lord Edmund's residence. He survived, though barely, having lost his wife, 3 children, and most of his household staff. Now he presides over a diminished domain with only his steward and a dozen servants, a stark contrast to the 50 who once served him. The poor man, imagine, is even compelled to perform some of his own duties now. But here, a truly remarkable shift begins, a transformation utterly inconceivable before the plague's devastation. You will not bow, you will not scrape. You will not tug your forelock and utter deferential, "Yes, my lord," and "No, my lord," like your father did. Why? Because Lord Edmund's dependence on you now vastly outweighs your dependence on him. Consider this. When half the population perishes, the remaining individuals become incredibly valuable. This is the stark reality of supply and demand. Medieval style. Your footsteps crunch on the frost-covered grass as you approach the manor. Today is the day. Today you will demand more wages. Just 3 months prior, such a thought would have earned you a whipping. But 3 months prior, Lord Edmund possessed other options. He does so no longer. The imposing stone walls of the manor house, once so formidable, now merely encase an increasingly empty residence. Most windows are shuttered. There's no sense in heating unoccupied rooms. You knock firmly on the heavy wooden door, 3 sharp raps echoing in the morning stillness. Footsteps approach, slow and deliberate. Richard, the steward, a man who once commanded 3 assistants, now performs every duty himself. "Morning, Thomas," he greets, his voice etched with the pervasive weariness of those striving to accomplish too much with too little. "Morning, Richard." "I need to speak with his lordship." Richard's eyebrow arches. Before the plague, peasants did not simply demand audiences with lords. But these are not before the plague times. "He's in the solar. I'll let him know you're here." You wait in the great hall, and even here, the profound changes are evident. The tapestries are dusty, with no one left to properly maintain them. The long tables where dozens once feasted are now mostly pushed against the walls, covered with cloths. Lord Edmund appears at the top of the stairs, seemingly smaller, thinner than you recall. The plague spared his life, but it aged him 2 decades and 5. His fine clothes hang loosely on his frame. Even the wealthy do not eat as well as they once did. Thomas, he says, descending the stairs with strained dignity, Richard informs me you wish to speak. I, my lord, about my wages. The words hang heavy in the air between you. A year ago, indeed, even 6 months ago, this conversation would have concluded with you in the stocks. But Lord Edmund merely sighs, like a man who has endured this exchange countless times. What are you currently earning? 2 shillings a week. But John over in Great Wickham, he's receiving 3 shillings for the same work. And they're including an extra measure of grain. Lord Edmund's jaw tightens. John has always been. He halts himself, taking a steadying breath. What precisely are you requesting? 3 shillings, and I want Sundays off properly off, not just morning service followed by a return to labor. The old Lord Edmund would have erupted in a furious tirade, summoned guards, and had you beaten. But the old Lord Edmund had 50 workers from which to choose. This Lord Edmund has you, and perhaps 5 others. He gazes out the window at his field's brown stubble where golden grain should be waving. Fields desperately needing plowing for winter wheat. Work that absolutely must be done, with too few hands to accomplish it. 2 shillings and 6pence, he concedes finally. And Sunday afternoons off. You feign careful consideration, though this offer already surpasses your expectations. Yet, you have learned a crucial lesson in these tumultuous years. When someone needs you more than you need them, you possess power. Done, you state, extending your hand. He shakes it, a lord shaking hands with a peasant. Your grandfather would have fainted from shock. As you walk back through the village, you pass the churchyard. The original cemetery overflowed long before the plague concluded its grim tally, necessitating new sections. Then those 2 filled. Now graves are scattered around the church like fallen leaves. Yet, life impossibly perseveres. You observe Margaret hanging laundry behind her cottage. She wears a dress far too elegant for a widow, but her husband had been the village's most prosperous merchant before his demise. Now she commands his business, diminished though it may be. Women inheriting property, managing their own enterprises, another unthinkable reality before. How strangely catastrophe breeds opportunity. She waves and you return the gesture. Perhaps later, once the work is done, you will stop by, share some ale, reminisce about how things once were, and perhaps, if the mood is right, contemplate how things might yet become. For this is the truth rarely revealed about surviving disasters. Eventually, one begins to envision the future once more. Your stomach rumbles again, a persistent reminder that survival still demands the essentials: sustenance, shelter, labor. But as you head towards your own fields, the very ones you are now renting, a testament to your newfound prosperity, your thoughts transcend mere subsistence. You contemplate advancement. The path to your fields leads past the old grain mill. Its wheel still turns, albeit slowly, for there is insufficient grain to keep it bustling. Before the plague, this mill operated from dawn till dusk during harvest season. Now perhaps 2 or 3 hours a day suffices. But even this is changing, gradually, because the survivors are eating better, working less, and demanding more. And when people possess more discretionary income, they purchase more grain, more meat, more of everything. It is akin to witnessing a broken mechanism slowly recommence operation. But differently, in some ways, better. Your fields stretch before you. Not vast, but undeniably yours, or rather, rented under terms your father could never have fathomed. Lord Edmund, desperate for hands to work this land, agreed to let you retain 60% of your harvest. Before the plague, a peasant was fortunate to keep 20%. The soil is dark and rich, prepared for winter planting. You run it through your fingers, feeling the potent promise within. This land could sustain a family with enough surplus to sell at market, perhaps even enough to acquire that piece of property by the river, vacant since the Hartwell family perished. For here is what no one anticipated. When the plague ceased its killing, it bequeathed a world of abundant land and scarce workers. And for the first time in centuries, this imbalance granted ordinary people choices. You spend the morning breaking ground for winter wheat, your wooden plow carving clean furrows in the earth. It is good work, honest work, but it is also chosen work. You are here because you desire to be, not by the arbitrary command of some lord. That distinction changes everything. Around midday, you pause for bread and ale. The bread is your own, baked from grain you cultivated yourself. It is dense, a little scorched on one side, but it is yours, and that makes it taste superior to any loaf a baker ever produced. As you eat, you observe smoke rising from chimneys across the village. Fewer chimneys, certainly, but those that are lit burn brighter. People heat their homes more effectively now, enjoy heartier meals, wear warmer clothes. The plague seized everything, yet it left everything behind for those who endured. You finish your meal and return to your labor. The afternoon sun warms your shoulders as you guide the plow through another furrow. In the distance you hear Margaret's children playing. They are among the few young voices left in the village, and their laughter carries further now, unburdened by competing sounds. It is a solitary sound, yet not entirely sorrowful, for those children are growing up in a world where a peasant can negotiate with a lord, where a widow can manage a business, where someone born in a humble hovel can eventually farm their own land. Is that not worth something? Indeed, it is worth everything. As the sun descends towards the horizon, you clean your tools and head home to a house larger than where you were raised, home to a supper superior to anything your parents ever ate, home to a life that, though born from tragedy, is undeniably better than what came before. Tomorrow you will plant more wheat. Next week, another conversation with Lord Edmund about wages or conditions will likely occur. Next month, perhaps you will make an offer on that property by the river. For the world ended, and then it began anew. Different, smaller in some respects, yet somehow grander in others. As you settle into bed, drawing warm wool blankets up to your chin, your thoughts turn to your children, the ones you may yet have. They will mature in a world where people like you, those who labor with their hands and earn their bread through sweat, truly possess a voice in shaping their destiny. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Your eyes grow heavy as the village embraces its quiet evening rhythm. Fewer voices now, but those that remain carry greater weight. The Black Death seized everything, but what it bequeathed, what it left behind, was possibility. Word travels swiftly in small villages, especially when it portends ill tidings for those in power. By autumn, 3 additional peasants in Little Wickham have demanded and secured raises. Margaret has engaged 2 neighbors to assist with her merchant business, offering wages that would have seemed fantastical just a few years prior. But here, the narrative takes a complicated turn. King Edward's court in London has been inundated with reports, tales of insolent peasants, of lords conceding exorbitant wages, of the natural order of society being turned upside down. And the king, it must be stated, is far from pleased that you first learn of this from a traveling tinker who stops in the village in late October. His cart, laden with pots and pans, carries something far more valuable: news from the wider world. Parliament has enacted a new law, he informs you as you inspect a copper pot. The Statute of Laborers, they call it. It dictates that no worker can demand more than they were paid in 1346, before all the dyeing commenced. You set the pot down, a chilling sensation settling in your stomach. What precisely does that entail? The tinker glances around, ensuring no eavesdroppers. It means if they apprehend you demanding higher wages, they can put you in the stocks, brand your face. In some places, they're hanging folk. The copper pot suddenly feels remarkably heavy in your hands. Of course, the tinker continues, lowering his voice, a law is one thing. Enforcement is another. It's difficult to punish a man when you desperately need him to harvest your grain. That night, you lie awake, listening to the wind rattle your shutters. The house feels less like a sanctuary now, more like a potential target. For this is the inherent paradox of progress. It inevitably incites the ire of those invested in the old ways. The next morning brings frost and dire news. Lord Edmund Stewart arrives at your door before sunrise, his face as grim as winter soil. His lordship wishes to see you. Immediately. The walk to the manor feels altered this time, longer, imbued with an ominous foreboding. The very stones beneath your feet seem to whisper warnings, and your breath emerges in sharp puffs, vanishing too quickly in the cold air. Lord Edmund awaits in the great hall, but he is not alone. Two men in the king's colors stand beside him, their swords hanging heavily at their sides. Royal commissioners, dispatched to ensure the new law's rigorous observance. Thomas, Lord Edmund states, his voice carefully neutral, I am afraid we must renegotiate our arrangement. One of the commissioners steps forward. He is young, perhaps 25, his hands soft, unmarred by the rigors of a plow. By order of King Edward, all wages are hereby restored to their 1346 levels. 2 shillings per week, no more. Your heart pounds, yet you maintain a steady voice. And if I refuse? The commissioner's hand moves instinctively to his sword hilt. Then you will find yourself explaining your refusal to the king's justice. We have stocks erected in the village square and brands heating in the forge. You look at Lord Edmund, searching his face for any flicker of support, but he avoids your gaze. Whatever power you believed you possessed, it has, just like that, vanished. I understand, you finally concede. For what other response is possible? Yet, as you walk back through the village, you perceive a profound shift. Other peasants are congregated around the well, their voices low but charged with urgency. Margaret is there too, alongside several farmers from neighboring villages. Word travels fast, and resistance, it seems, travels even faster. They cannot simply take it back. Someone exclaims, "We are the ones performing the labor. We are the ones they need." King or no king, another voice adds, dead men cannot plant grain. You join the circle, feeling the tension crackle like lightning preceding a storm. These are people who have tasted freedom, and they are not eager to relinquish it. What are you contemplating? You inquire. Margaret speaks up, her voice possessing an edge you have never heard before. We are contemplating whether it is time the king learned who truly keeps this country running. That afternoon, as you toil in your fields, you witness the smoke. 3 columns ascend from the direction of Great Wickham, then more from Little Thornton and Wickfield. By evening, the horizon is dotted with orange glows against the darkening sky. Granaries, tax records, manor outbuildings, nothing designed to inflict actual harm, but everything intended to convey a potent message. The revolution has begun. It commences subtly, as most revolutions do. A tax collector here, a royal commissioner there, suddenly discovering themselves unwelcomed in villages where they once commanded respect. Sometimes it is merely cold shoulders and empty houses. Sometimes it is stones hurled from behind hedges. But by winter, it is spreading. You hear tales from traveling merchants, when any are brave enough to venture, forth of peasants in Kent marching on royal castles, of workers in Essex refusing to harvest grain for lords who will not pay fair wages, of entire villages in Yorkshire simply vanishing, people gathering their meager possessions and relocating to places where they can secure better treatment. And the astonishing truth is, the lords are powerless to stop them. For suppressing a few troublemakers is one thing. Stopping half your remaining workforce is economic suicide. Lord Edmund initially employs threats, then bargaining, then something utterly unthinkable before, begging. "Look," he pleads during another awkward meeting in the Great Hall. "I know the commissioners decreed 2 shillings. But what if we called it 2 shillings plus expenses, food allowances, extra grain rations?" You feign consideration, though you are primarily savoring the sight of a lord squirming. What manner of food allowances? Well, meat twice a week, good bread, ale with dinner, and housing. You can retain the house you occupy now, rent-free. It is not everything you had before, but it is something. More importantly, it proves that laws are mere words on parchment when reality refuses to cooperate. You shake his hand once more, and this time, his grip is desperate. Winter blankets the village in a heavy quietude, yet it is a restless stillness. Letters arrive at the manor with increasing frequency, borne by nervous messengers who depart swiftly. Reports from other parts of the kingdom, most bearing ill tidings for anyone wearing a crown. The inherent truth is, when you eliminate half the population, you do not merely lose workers. You unravel the very social fabric that binds everything together, the unquestioned authority, the ancient assumptions about who belongs where. And once people begin to challenge those assumptions, it becomes exceedingly difficult to compel them to cease. Spring heralds news of grander uprisings. No longer mere local disputes over wages, but organized rebellions with leaders, explicit demands, and actual armies. Peasants who have decided they are weary of being peasants. The name on everyone's lips is Wat Tyler, a man from Kent who has apparently concluded that the king's commissioners, and indeed the king himself, can go to hell. They say he commands 10,000 men, Margaret informs you as you assist with repairing her roof. All armed, all furious. You hammer another nail into the thatch, reflecting on how profoundly everything is altered. Before the plague, 10,000 enraged peasants would have been an impossibility lacking the collective discontent, the shared confidence, or the organizational capacity. But after the plague, well, surviving a catastrophe teaches you that the impossible frequently occurs. What does he desire? You ask. An end to serfdom, fair wages, death to corrupt officials. She pauses, then adds quietly, "Sounds entirely reasonable to me." By early summer, the rebellion is no longer merely a story whispered by travelers. It is a palpable presence on the horizon, smoke from burning tax offices, streams of refugees fleeing areas where royal armies and peasant militias engage in running battles. And then, one June morning, you awaken to discover armed men encamped in your village square. Not royal soldiers, precisely, nor merely local peasants. Something in between. Men with weather-beaten faces and calloused hands, yet bearing proper weapons and wearing fragments of armor, clearly acquired from elsewhere. Their leader, a woman, a shocking enough sight in itself, carries herself with an air of authority, and when she speaks, people listen. "We are bound for London," she announces to the swelling crowd, "to present our demands directly to the king. All who wish to join are welcome." What demands? Someone calls out. She unfurls a piece of parchment, though you suspect she has memorized every word. End serfdom and villanage. Fair wages for all workers. Abolition of poll taxes. Punishment for corrupt officials who have grown fat while honest people starve. The crowd murmurs, weighing the inherent risks. For joining a rebellion is grave business. People are hanged for such acts. But then again, people have been hanged merely for seeking fair wages. What makes you believe the king will listen? Lord Edmund has appeared, flanked by his remaining guards, but his voice has lost its former authority. He sounds genuinely worried. The woman gazes at him with something akin to pity. "Your lordship, with due respect, the king has little choice. Half his tax collectors are dead or fled. His armies are spread thin, battling uprisings from here to Scotland. And winter approaches. If he desires grain harvested, bread baked, and roads maintained, he needs us far more than we need him." She is correct, and everyone present understands it. That evening, as the rebels establish their camp in the common pasture, you find yourself pondering choices, the life you have painstakingly built since the plague, and whether it is worth risking for the chance at something greater. Margaret has already made her decision. She sold her business to a cousin, packed all her belongings into a wagon, and volunteered to organize supplies for the march to London. "Are you coming?" she asks as you help load her possessions. You survey the village, the house you have made a home, the fields you have toiled, the life you have slowly, meticulously constructed from the ruins of the old world. It is a good life, better than anything your parents could have conceived. But it is also a life contingent on the fleeting goodwill of those who would snatch it away in an instant, if they could. Yes, you state finally, "I am coming." For here is what you have learned in the years since the plague. Survival is not merely about remaining alive. It is about building something truly worth living for. The next morning, you secure your door, leaving a note for Lord Edmund explaining that you have departed to discuss working conditions with the king, and join the swelling line of people heading south towards London. The roads teem with others like you, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and laborers, all united by the profound conviction that they deserve better than what they are receiving. Some carry weapons, others merely tools, but all carry something that would have been unimaginable before the plague: hope. The landscape you traverse narrates the story of the last 5 years in burned fields and empty villages, in manor houses with boarded windows. But it also tells another story, in new construction, in improved roads, in signs of careful, purposeful rebuilding. For this is the enduring truth of catastrophes. They clear away the old, creating fertile ground for something new to flourish. As you walk, you converse with your fellow travelers, a blacksmith from Essex whose lord attempted to have his wages, a miller from Suffolk whose grain stores were seized by royal tax collectors, a weaver from Norfolk whose entire village was razed for refusing to pay an unaffordable poll tax. All possess stories, all harbor grievances, all share the same stark realization that individual resistance is no longer sufficient. By the third day, your group has swelled to nearly 1,000 people. By the fifth day, rumors abound of other groups converging on London from every direction, tens of thousands of people, all with the same destination and the same unwavering demands. The king, whether he desires to or not, will be compelled to listen. You encamp that night on a hilltop overlooking the Thames, and in the distance, you discern the smoke and lights of London, the greatest city in England. Tomorrow, you will bear witness to what might be the most pivotal conversation in the kingdom's history. As you settle into your bedroll, listening to the murmuring conversations around the campfire, you reflect on how far you have come, not merely in miles, but in every other conceivable way. 5 years ago, you were a serf, bound to your lord's land without permission. Tonight, you are a free man, encamped outside the capital, preparing to negotiate with the king as an equal. That, in itself, is worth something, even if tomorrow proves disastrous. The stars overhead are the very same ones that shone down on the plague years, when bodies filled the streets and the future seemed an impossible dream. Yet, impossibly, the future arrived nonetheless, and it bears no resemblance to anyone's expectations. London assaults your senses like a physical blow. The stench reaches you first, long before the city walls become visible. Thousands of people packed together. Cooking fires, waste, horses, and beneath it all, something else. A pervasive dread that clenches your stomach with memory. You crest the final hill on June 13th, and there it lies, England's greatest city, sprawling below you like a colossal beast. Stone walls, church spires, the tower looming over the Thames like a giant's clenched fist. And encompassing it all, camps thousands upon thousands of people just like you. Peasants, craftsmen, and laborers who have journeyed hundreds of miles to confront a king. Jesus, breathes the blacksmith walking beside you. Look at them all. The camps extend for miles along the river. Banners flutter in the morning breeze, most homemade, bearing symbols you recognize from your own village, the cross of St. George, tools of various trades, and here and there, more ominous signs, nooses, headless crowns, slogans painted on rough cloth proclaiming death to traitors. And when Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? Your group secures a space on a hillside called Blackheath, where the Kent rebels have gathered under their leader. Wat Tyler is smaller than you anticipated, perhaps 40 years old, with a face weathered by hardship and difficult decisions. Yet, when he speaks, all listen intently. "Brothers," he proclaims, his voice carrying effortlessly across the camp, "tomorrow we enter the city not as conquerors, but as free men seeking justice from our king." Cheers erupt from the crowd, but Tyler raises his hand for silence. "Remember, we are not here to destroy. We are here to build, to dismantle the corrupt system that has held us in chains and replace it with something just, something humane." You find yourself nodding in agreement, swept up in the hope and energy of the moment. Around you, faces radiate with something that has been absent from English villages for far too long. Possibility. That night, you barely sleep. The excitement is infectious, crackling through the camp like lightning. People share food, stories, and dreams of what lies ahead. A miller from Canterbury speaks of establishing a cooperative where workers share the profits. A weaver from Dover envisions guilds managed by craftsmen rather than wealthy merchants. But beneath the hope, a palpable tension lingers, for everyone understands that the events of the coming days will determine whether this ends in triumph or massacre. Dawn breaks, gray and misty over the Thames, and with it comes movement. Thousands of people break camp, gather their belongings, forming loose columns that stretch back towards the horizon. The march to London commences. You walk with Margaret and the blacksmith, part of a human river flowing towards the city gates. The guards at Aldgate take one look at the approaching multitude and simply step aside, a prudent decision. London streets are narrow, winding, designed for perhaps a few hundred people at a time, not several thousand. The crowd disperses like water, finding its level, filling every available space. The city reacts. Some Londoners slam their shutters and bar their doors. Others lean out of windows, cheering, tossing bread and coins. A few brave souls even join the march craftsmen and laborers who have nursed their own grievances against the affluent merchants who govern the city. But it is upon reaching the wealthy quarter that things become truly volatile. The houses here are distinctly different, larger, constructed of stone rather than timber, with courtyards and gardens, all the hallmarks of lives lived in opulent comfort while others struggled. Someone hurls a stone. You are unsure who, but suddenly the air is thick with them. Windows shatter, doors splinter, and the crowd tastes blood. The Savoy Palace, John of Gaunt's residence, becomes the focal point. The most magnificent edifice in London after the royal palaces, home to the man who has been the true power behind the throne while young King Richard matures. Burn it! Someone shouts, and suddenly everyone is shouting it. You find yourself swept along with the surging crowd, through the palace gates, into courtyards filled with treasures representing more wealth than your entire village sees in a decade. Tapestries, gold plate, furniture carved from exotic woods. And all of it, every single piece, bought with money wrung from those who toil for a living. The palace burns beautifully. You stand in the courtyard, watching flames lick at the windows, feeling the heat on your face, and contemplating justice, balance, and how sometimes the only way to construct something new is to first incinerate what came before. Margaret appears beside you, her face illuminated by the orange glow. Feel good? She asks. Yes, you admit, it does. Yet, even as the palace burns, Tyler endeavors to maintain order. You observe him moving through the crowd, reminding people that their purpose is justice, not wanton revenge. That destroying property is one thing, but harming people is another. For the most part, people heed his words. For the most part. The Fleet prison is opened, and suddenly the streets teem with freed prisoners. Some are debtors, incarcerated for unpaid sums. Others have been imprisoned for more serious offenses. Temple Bar burns next, along with all the legal records stored there, centuries of laws, precedents, and property deeds consumed in an afternoon of smoke and celebration. For here is what the lawyers and lawmakers never grasped. When the law exclusively serves the wealthy, burning the law begins to feel like justice. As evening descends, you find yourself with a group of rebels encircling the Tower of London, the ancient fortress where kings have lived and died, where traitors have been executed, where the machinery of royal power grinds on, regardless of who suffers beneath it. And inside, trembling behind stone walls that suddenly seem less impregnable, is 14-year-old King Richard himself. Come out! Someone bellows. Come out and face your people. But the tower remains silent, its gates locked, its guards conspicuously absent. Tyler arrives with a message. The king, through intermediaries, has agreed to meet tomorrow morning at Mile End, outside the city walls, a place where both sides can gather safely. He has agreed to hear our demands, Tyler announces. All of them. Freedom from serfdom, fair wages, punishment for corrupt officials. The crowd erupts in cheers. But you note Tyler's expression remains cautious, hopeful, yet careful. For promising to listen and genuinely listening are two very different things. That night, you sleep in the ruins of a tax collector's office. The papers and ledgers that once meticulously recorded every penny owed by every peasant in 3 counties now serve as excellent kindling for your campfire. Outside, London burns in a dozen places, not the entire city, but enough to transmit a message visible for miles. The old order is ending. What comes next? That is tomorrow's question. Morning arrives with the resonant call of trumpets. Royal trumpets summoning from the direction of Mile End. King Richard, it seems, is ready to converse. The march out of the city differs from the march in, more organized, more purposeful. Tyler has managed to instill a semblance of discipline within the crowd, arranging them in rough columns with representatives from various regions. You walk with the Essex group, perhaps 2,000 strong, bearing banners enumerating your specific grievances: an end to serfdom, abolition of poll taxes, fair courts, the right to hunt in royal forests, simple things, truly human things. Mile End is a vast field outside London's walls, perfectly suited for the monumental gathering about to transpire. And there, awaiting at a raised platform, surrounded by guards and nobles, is the king himself, Richard Plantagenet, 14 years old, heir to Edward the Black Prince, ruler of England, though at this moment he appears more like a frightened boy striving desperately to seem brave. Which, to be fair, he probably is. The meeting commences with ceremony. Heralds reading proclamations, nobles delivering speeches about royal mercy and divine authority. But Tyler cuts through it all with a bluntness that unnerves lawyers. "Your Majesty," he declares, stepping forward, "we have come to discuss the terms under which your people, all your people, can live with dignity." Richard's voice, higher than you expected, still changing, yet carries clearly across the field. "We are prepared to hear your concerns." What ensues is the most extraordinary conversation in English history. A king negotiating with peasants as equals. Tyler presents the demands one by one. An end to serfdom and villanage, freedom for all bondmen, reduction of rents to reasonable levels, amnesty for all rebels, charters guaranteeing these rights in perpetuity. And Richard, young, afraid, but apparently well advised, agrees to all of it. Every single demand. The crowd erupts. People weep, embrace, fall to their knees in gratitude. You find yourself trembling, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what has just occurred. Serfdom ended, just like that, with words on parchment and a royal seal. Scribes immediately begin copying charters documents that will be carried back to every village and town. Irrefutable proof that the old system is dead and something new has been born. You are handed a charter, the parchment still damp with ink, bearing the royal seal that confers upon it the power of law. Freedom, spelled out in Latin and English, as official as sunrise. Margaret is weeping, and you realize you are too. But even as the celebration begins, you notice something. Tyler is not celebrating. He observes the king and the surrounding nobles with the careful attention of a man who understands that promises extracted under duress are easily broken once the pressure subsides. And he is right to be cautious, for while this meeting unfolds, while charters are written and hands are shaken, other events are transpiring. A group of rebels, frustrated by the slow pace of negotiation, has decided to take more direct action. They have stormed the Tower of London, overwhelming the guards, seeking the men they hold responsible for years of oppression: Simon Sudbury, Archbishop of Canterbury and Chancellor of England, The man who sanctioned the poll taxes and upheld the old system. Robert Hales, Treasurer of England, who collected those taxes and filled the royal coffers while peasants starved. John Legge, the bureaucrat who devised the entire oppressive system. They find all three, drag them from their hiding places, and execute them on Tower Hill. The news reaches Mile End just as the charter ceremony concludes, carried by a breathless messenger who can barely articulate the words. The tower's taken. The traitors are dead. Sudbury's head's on a spike. The celebration darkens, grows more urgent. For this changes everything. There is no turning back now, no pretense that this was merely a peaceful petition for the redress of grievances. This is revolution, complete and bloody. Richard's face pales, but to his credit, he does not flee. Instead, he requests another meeting tomorrow at Smithfield to discuss additional concerns. Tyler agrees, though you can discern the calculation in his eyes. He knows the game has changed. He knows that executing royal officials renders this an entirely different kind of negotiation. That night, encamped again outside London, the mood is strange, jubilant, and terrified in equal measure, because everyone comprehends that they have crossed a line. There is no longer a peaceful resolution. Either the rebellion succeeds completely, or it fails catastrophically. No middle ground. You lie awake, listening to the murmur of conversations around the camp, contemplating the charter carefully folded in your pack freedom, written in royal ink on royal parchment butt, also considering the heads on pikes at the tower, and what they signify for anyone who participated in placing them there. Tomorrow's meeting at Smithfield will determine whether you return home as free men or die as traitors. And honestly, you are unsure which is more probable. The stars overhead are the same ones that illuminated your village when this all began, with a simple request for fair wages. But somehow, impossibly, that simple request has escalated into something far greater, a demand that England itself change, or perish in the attempt. Either way, there is no returning to the way things were. The old world died with the plague, and tomorrow you will discover whether the new world gets to live. Smithfield feels different. Where Mile End was open, welcoming, a place for equals to meet and converse, Smithfield feels like a trap. It is smaller, more enclosed, with too many potential hiding places for armed men. You notice these details now. After a week of revolution, your eyes have learned to detect threats, to calculate distances to exits, to discern the difference between a nervous guard and a dangerous one. The king arrives with more soldiers this time, significantly more. They encircle the field in precise formations, ostensibly for protection. But you cannot shake the sensation that their true purpose is entirely different. Richard also appears altered, less like a frightened boy, more like someone who spent the night receiving counsel from those adept at handling troublesome peasants. Wat Tyler steps forward, and you can perceive the tension in his shoulders. He knows this meeting will not resemble yesterday's, but he is too deeply committed now to retreat. Your Majesty, Tyler begins, we have come to discuss additional terms, but Richard cuts him off. The terms discussed yesterday are sufficient. We suggest you return to your homes and trouble us no more. The words strike the crowd like a physical blow. Yesterday's promises suddenly conditional, suddenly negotiable. Tyler's voice hardens. With respect, Your Majesty, those terms did not address everything. We require guarantees, true guarantees, and we require them in writing, with penalties for anyone who attempts to reverse them. You need? Richard's voice carries a new, sharp edge. You forget yourself, Tyler. We are your king. You do not make demands of us. The crowd behind you stirs, restless, sensing the shift in mood. Yesterday, they were citizens petitioning their ruler. Today, they are rebels confronting judgment. Tyler takes another step forward, close enough now that you can see the sweat on his face despite the cool morning air. Your Majesty, we are reasonable men. We have shed blood for what is right. We will not return home empty-handed. Blood, Richard's voice rises. You speak of blood? You murdered our chancellor, our treasurer, men who served the crown faithfully. Men who served themselves, Tyler retorts. While honest people starved, the space between them crackles with tension too. Men representing two entirely divergent philosophies on how the world should operate. And around them, thousands of people awake to see which philosophy prevails. That is when it happens. Tyler, exasperated by the king's sudden intransigence, makes a gesture. Perhaps he reaches for his sword. Perhaps he is merely emphasizing a point. Perhaps he is attempting to demonstrate something. It matters not. William Walworth, Lord Mayor of London, observes Tyler's hand move towards his weapon and decides he has witnessed enough. His sword flashes out in one fluid motion, striking Tyler in the neck before anyone can react. Tyler staggers, blood spraying, his eyes wide with shock. He takes 2 more steps, reaching out towards the king as if to speak, and collapses dead. Just like that. The silence stretches for perhaps 3 heartbeats, long enough for everyone to grasp the gravity of what has transpired. Then chaos. The crowd surges forward, screaming for vengeance. Swords are drawn, bows are strung. The careful discipline Tyler had imposed vanishes in an instant, and that is when Richard performs an extraordinary act. He spurs his horse forward, directly into the mob, his young voice cutting through the screaming. You shall have no captain but me. The words are perfectly chosen, perfectly timed, because these are not anarchists or criminals. They are people who still believe in kingship, who still believe their grievances can be addressed by appealing to royal justice. And here is their king, young and brave and seemingly sympathetic, offering to be their leader. The crowd, incredibly, actually halts. Follow me. Richard continues, his voice gaining strength. I will be your king and your captain. Your grievances shall be heard. Justice shall be done. It is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Because instead of facing an enraged mob seeking revenge for their murdered leader, he has engineered a situation where he is leading that mob, where their anger becomes his to direct. The crowd follows him away from Smithfield, away from Tyler's body, to an open field where they can be properly surrounded by royal troops. And once they are there, once they are isolated and outnumbered, Richard's true intentions become chillingly clear. Men of Essex, Kent, and Suffolk, he announces, his voice now carrying total authority. You have been deceived, led astray by traitors and rebels. But we are merciful. Return to your homes now, and we will forgive your momentary confusion. The crowd murmurs, uncertain. Some of the rebels nod, ready to accept the offer. Others look suspicious, sensing the trap. What about the charters? Someone calls out. What about our freedom? Richard's smile does not reach his eyes. Those agreements were made under duress. Contracts signed with the sword at one's throat have no legal standing, and there it is. The betrayal, complete and final. You feel something cold settle in your stomach as the full magnitude of the situation crystallizes. There is no returning home as free men. There is no peaceful resolution. There's only whatever comes next. Some of the rebels break and run immediately. scattering towards the edges of the field. Others attempt to maintain formation, to negotiate, to salvage something from the wreckage. But the royal troops are already moving, encircling groups of rebels, separating leaders from followers, beginning the systematic process of transforming a political uprising into a criminal conspiracy. You grab Margaret's hand. We need to go, now. What about the others? The others are finished. We stay, we're finished too. You slip away during the confusion, moving towards the edge of the field where the encirclement is not yet complete. Behind you, you can hear shouting, the clash of weapons, the sound of a revolution dying in real time. The journey home consumes 2 weeks, 2 weeks of traveling by night, hiding during the day, avoiding main roads where royal patrols might be hunting for rebels. The countryside graphically narrates the story of the crackdown, smoke rising from villages that supported the rebellion, bodies hanging from trees along major roads, burned farmhouses belonging to families whose men marched to London. King Richard, it turns out, is exceptionally skilled at holding grudges. You reach Little Wickham on a grey morning in early July and find a village transformed. Royal commissioners have passed through, asking questions, taking names, compiling lists. Lord Edmund greets you at the manor house, but not with relief, rather with cold calculation. Thomas, he says, scrutinizing you like he's evaluating livestock. I hear you have been traveling. Aye, my lord, just visiting family. Family in London, was it? The question hangs in the air between you, because everyone knows where you have been. Everyone knows what you have done. The only question is whether Lord Edmund intends to act upon it. I have been asked, he continues slowly, to provide names of men from this village who might have participated in recent disturbances. Your mouth goes dry. And, he adds, I have informed them that my workers were here the entire time, assisting with the harvest, far too busy to go gallivanting off to London. Relief floods through you, but it arrives with an attached price tag. Of course, Lord Edmund adds, busy workers deserve appropriate compensation. I am thinking 18 pence a week. No more requests for raises. No more negotiations. Take it, or find yourself explaining to the King's Justice why you happen to be away from the village during the recent unpleasantness. 18 pence less than you were earning before the rebellion, less than you had negotiated after the plague, but more than nothing, which is what you will receive if you are hanged as a traitor. 18 pence sounds fair, you respond. For what choice do you truly possess? The ensuing months are quiet. Dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet that descends when people are afraid to speak, afraid to complain, afraid to do anything that might attract unwanted attention. The rebellion's leaders are systematically hunted down. Some are publicly executed, their heads impaled on spikes as stark warnings. Others simply vanish, their fates left to grim speculation. The promises made at Mile End are forgotten. The charters guaranteeing freedom are declared null and void. The end of serfdom is postponed indefinitely. On the surface, it is as if the rebellion never occurred. Yet beneath, things have changed in ways that cannot be undone. For here is the fundamental truth about revolutions, even failed ones. They profoundly alter how people perceive themselves, their place in the world, and what is truly possible. You work Lord Edmund's fields, but you do not work them in the same manner. There's a sullenness to it now, a resentment that was absent before. You perform what is required, but no more. And when opportunities arise to create small problems, equipment that mysteriously breaks at inconvenient times, grain that somehow gets spilled, work that takes longer than it should, well, accidents happen. Other villages experience similar accidents. Productivity across the kingdom declines. Not dramatically, but enough to be noticed, enough to matter. And the royal treasury, despite the crackdown, continues to struggle, because dead peasants do not pay taxes, fled workers do not harvest grain, and sullen, resentful laborers do not work as diligently as motivated ones. Winter brings news from London. Parliament has abandoned attempts to collect poll taxes. Too expensive to enforce, too perilous to pursue. The rebellion failed, yet its central demand, the very catalyst of all the trouble, has quietly been achieved. Small victories dot by spring. Subtle changes permeate the kingdom. Lords offer better terms to prevent workers from fleeing. The church preaches less about obedience and more about justice. Merchants hire workers at wages that would have been unthinkable just a few years prior. Not because anyone has fundamentally altered their views on the natural order of things, but because the natural order, after the plague, after the rebellion, simply no longer functions. Margaret is prospering. She has opened a new shop in the next village, buying and selling goods for travelers. Business thrives, partly due to her acumen, partly because she is one of the few remaining individuals with sufficient capital to capitalize on opportunities. "Funny how things work out," she remarks one evening as you share wine, considerably finer than the ale you once shared by her fireplace. All that fighting, all that dying, and in the end, we secured most of what we wanted anyway. Did we? Look around. You are paying lower rent than before the rebellion. I am running my own business. The poll tax is gone. Lords are now competing for workers instead of the other way around. She is correct, in a way. The rebellion failed, but the world it fought for, that world arrived nonetheless slowly, quietly, through 1,000 small adjustments and compromises. For that is often how genuine change unfolds, not through grand gestures and dramatic confrontations, but through the steady, persistent pressure of people who steadfastly refuse to accept the unacceptable. You contemplate Wat Tyler, sometimes lying in the dirt at Smithfield, blood pooling around his head. He died for nothing and for everything. The immediate cause was lost, but the deeper cause, the profound ideal he truly fought for, that survived. Freedom is not merely a word on parchment. It is a way of thinking, a resolute refusal to accept that some individuals matter more than others simply due to their birthright. And once that idea is unleashed into the world, it is exceedingly difficult to contain. Outside Margaret's window, you perceive lights and houses across the village. People living their lives, making their choices, building their futures not as serfs or bondmen, but as free people who happen to be poor. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. The plague claimed half the population of Europe. The rebellion that followed claimed hundreds more lives. But what emerged from all that death, what crawled from the wreckage of the old world, was something unprecedented. A society where ordinary people possessed choices, where someone born in a hovel could eventually own land, where a widow could manage a business, where a peasant could tell a lord no and live to recount it. It was not the world Tyler envisioned, but it was closer to that dream than anyone thought possible when the dying began, and the future seemed an utter impossibility. Change arrives slowly, then all at once. And sometimes, if one is exceptionally fortunate, one gets to experience the moment when everything shifts, when old assumptions crumble, when new possibilities suddenly seem tangible. The Black Death was the most horrific event to strike medieval Europe. But what came after, what blossomed from the soil fertilized by so much death, was the genesis of the modern world. A world where people like you matter, where your voice resonates, where the future belongs to everyone, not solely to those born wealthy enough to own it. That is a truth worth remembering as you drift off to sleep in a house you chose to inhabit, earning wages you helped negotiate, in a village where you are free to stay or depart as you please. The revolution failed, but somehow, impossibly, you won anyway. Time possesses a peculiar ability to mend wounds once deemed unclosable. It has been 15 years since the rebellion. 15 years since Wat Tyler perished in the dirt at Smithfield. 15 years since you walked home from London with a price on your head and revolution in your heart. Now, you are 43 years old. You own your house outright. Your fields yield enough grain to sustain your family and to sell at market. Your oldest son is learning to read, an impossibility for someone of your social standing before the plague. Irrevocably altered everything. And sometimes, on tranquil evenings, when the work is done and the village settles into its peaceful rhythm, you almost forget how the world used to be. But then, something occurs to remind you. A letter arrives from a cousin in Venice, or a merchant passes through with narratives from France. Or you catch sight of one of those peculiar new dockers walking through the countryside, wearing their strange, bird-like masks. And you remember that the changes, the truly fundamental changes, are still spreading like ripples in a pond. The Venetians, those clever bastards, deciphered something that had eluded everyone else. They recognized that the plague was not merely God's wrath, or bad air, or punishment for sin. It was something specific, something that transmitted from person to person, from place to place, in ways that could be predicted and perhaps controlled. So they undertook something radical. They constructed hospitals, not for treating the afflicted. There was still little anyone could do for plague victims, but for isolating the sick from the healthy. Islands in their lagoon dedicated entirely to isolation and quarantine. Quarantina * 40 days. That was the duration they determined necessary to ascertain whether someone would live or die. The idea spread slowly at first, then with increasing rapidity as people realized it actually worked. Florence erected lazarettos. Milan established quarantine houses. Cities across Europe began treating disease as something that could be combated, rather than simply endured. It was revolutionary in its own quiet way, for it implied that people were no longer merely helpless victims. They could take action, make choices, protect themselves and their families through knowledge and planning, rather than relying solely on prayer and hope. That fundamental shift alters how you perceive everything. Your youngest daughter, born 5 years after the rebellion, has matured in a world where diseases have identifiable causes, where doctors wear specialized garments and carry medicines that occasionally prove effective, where the arrival of plague in a neighboring city triggers quarantine and precautions, not simply resignation to God's will. She expects the world to be comprehensible. She expects problems to possess solutions. She expects figures of authority to justify their decisions, rather than merely demanding obedience. That is not how children thought before the plague, before the rebellion, before everything changed. Margaret's grandson is now apprenticed to a painter. Not just any painter, but one of those new artists emerging from the Italian city's individuals who depict what they actually observe, rather than what religious authorities dictate they should see. All this new thinking began with the plague. When you have witnessed half your neighbors perish for no explicable reason, when you have seen the most devout suffer alongside the worst sinners, when you have buried children who never harmed anyone, well, It compels you to question certain assumptions about divine justice, about the natural order, about whether those in power genuinely understand what they are discussing. The painters, the writers, the scholars, they are asking different questions now. Instead of what does the church say about this, they are asking, what do we actually perceive? What can we prove? What makes logical sense? It is dangerous thinking, revolutionary thinking, and it is spreading. You observe it in small daily ways. The village priest still delivers sermons on Sundays about obedience and accepting one's station in life, but fewer people nod in agreement. More individuals pose awkward questions about why God would permit good people to suffer while corrupt officials prosper. The manor house still dominates the landscape, but Lord Edmund now spends more time negotiating with workers than commanding them, for he learned the hard way that those unwilling to work for him can usually find someone else who will treat them better. The royal tax collectors still appear, but they are polite about it now, almost apologetic, because everyone remembers what transpired the last time they became too aggressive about collecting money from people who could not afford to pay. Power, real power, has shifted in ways that are subtle to perceive but impossible to ignore. From the top down to the bottom, from those who own to those who work, from tradition to innovation. You are witnessing the birth of something entirely new. A world where ordinary people matter, where individual lives hold value beyond their utility to wealthy landowners, where someone born in poverty might just die in comfort. Not everyone, of course, not yet, probably not ever, but enough people for it to feel possible. And possibility, once tasted, is addictive. Your son aspires to be a lawyer. Can you imagine? A peasant's son arguing cases in court, interpreting law, perhaps even drafting new laws? Before the plague, before the rebellion, before everything shifted, that would have been unthinkable. Now, well, stranger things have occurred. The universities are also different, still exclusive, still expensive, but no longer quite as rigid about who gains admittance. Scholarship students from merchant families, bright young men whose fathers work with their hands instead of inheriting wealth. Knowledge, slowly, is becoming less of a monopoly. Books are still rare, still precious, but they are more numerous than they once were. Copying manuscripts is faster now, more efficient. And the subjects, they are broader, less focused on religious doctrine, more interested in practical matters: medicine, engineering, astronomy, agriculture. How to actually solve problems, instead of merely explaining why God permits them to exist. You have learned to read a little yourself, not extensively, but enough to decipher contracts and legal documents, enough to recognize when someone attempts to deceive you with ornate language. Knowledge is power, and power, even a small amount, changes everything. The roads are better maintained now, not because the king decreed it, but because merchants and travelers demanded it. Because people who can afford to travel desire safe, reliable routes. Because local communities realize they could levy taxes on road usage and fund improvements themselves. Self-interest, when properly organized, proves to be a powerful engine for positive change. Who would have thought? The markets are also livelier, more goods, more choices, more competition among sellers, which translates to better prices for buyers, better wages for workers, better opportunities for anyone clever enough to seize them. Margaret is indeed thriving. Her trading business now spans 3 counties, dealing in everything from grain to metalwork to exotic spices from places you cannot pronounce. She employs 12 people, pays them fair wages, and somehow still manages to turn a healthy profit. The secret, She tells you over wine considerably superior to the ale you once shared, is treating workers as partners rather than property. Happy people work harder. Satisfied customers return. Honest dealing builds reputations, and reputation builds wealth. Revolutionary thinking, but it works. The village itself has grown, though not back to its pre-plague size. That will likely never happen. But new families have moved in, younger people seeking opportunities, craftsmen drawn by the prospect of affordable land and lower taxes, new blood, new ideas, new ways of doing things. The church is also different. Father Michael still preaches on Sundays, but his sermons focus more on compassion and community service, less on obedience and eternal damnation. He has learned that people who have survived catastrophe seek practical guidance, not threats of theoretical punishment. Moreover, he requires the congregation's support more than they require his approval. Empty churches do not collect tithes. Even God's representatives must adapt to new realities. But perhaps the most remarkable change, the one that would have been impossible to conceive 30 years ago, is how people envision the future. Before the plague, the future was predetermined, fixed. You were born into a station in life, and you died in the same station. Your children inherited your social position along with your debts. Progress was measured in generations, if it occurred at all. Now people make plans, set goals, imagine their children leading better lives than they did. Believe that hard work and clever thinking can actually alter outcomes. Hope, it turns out, is contagious. Your oldest daughter is married to a blacksmith's son who is saving money to open his own shop. Your middle son works as a clerk for a wool merchant, learning the business, planning to eventually establish his own trading company. Your youngest wishes to study medicine, to become one of those new doctors who actually heal people instead of merely blessing them. 3 children, 3 different paths, all of them leading upward. That is not luck. That is not accident. That is the direct consequence of living in a world where social mobility, though still challenging, is at least possible. The Black Death created that world, not intentionally, not kindly, but definitively. By claiming so many lives, it shattered the rigid social structures that had held everyone in place for centuries. By engendering labor shortages, it afforded ordinary workers bargaining power they had never possessed before. By demonstrating that traditional authority could protect no one from catastrophe, it opened space for new modes of thinking. The price was horrific. 25 million dead in Europe alone, families annihilated, communities wiped out, an entire generation traumatized by losses too vast to comprehend. But from that trauma, somehow, something unprecedented emerged. A society where individual merit superseded inherited status, where innovation was valued alongside tradition, where people could question authority without facing immediate execution, the foundation, in other words, of the modern world. Not that anyone planned it that way. History rarely unfolds according to plan. Usually, it stumbles forward through a confluence of catastrophe and adaptation, crisis and opportunity, blind luck and stubborn human determination to survive. The plague was the catastrophe. The rebellion was the crisis. What came after, what you are living through now, is the adaptation. And it is remarkable that you sit by your fireplace on a winter evening in 1398, watching your youngest daughter practice writing by candlelight. Her letters are neat, careful, superior to your own halting attempts at literacy. She is composing a letter to her cousin in London, describing village life, sharing news and gossip and plans for the future ordinary correspondence between ordinary people. Except that 30 years ago, ordinary people could not write letters, because they could not write, because they had no one to correspond with, because their lives were too narrow and constrained to generate news worth sharing. Now your daughter's life overflows with possibilities. Schooling if she is intelligent enough, marriage if she finds the right partner, business if she is ambitious enough, travel if she is adventurous enough. Freedom not unlimited, but real. That is the plague's strangest legacy. Not the millions of deaths, though those are remembered. Not the economic disruption, though that is still palpable. But the simple fact that people now expect their lives to matter, expect their voices to be heard, expect their work to be valued, expect their children to have opportunities. Expectations, once raised, are incredibly difficult to lower. Outside your window, the village sleeps peacefully under a blanket of snow. Smoke rises from chimneys. Dogs bark in the distance. Someone plays a lute, badly but enthusiastically. Normal sounds. Comfortable sounds. The sounds of people living their lives without fear of sudden catastrophe or arbitrary punishment. It took 30 years, but somehow, impossibly, normalcy returned different than before. Better in many ways, but recognizably blessedly normal. The plague taught Europe that catastrophe was always possible. The rebellion taught it that change was always possible too. And what emerged from those lessons was a new kind of society, one built on the revolutionary idea that ordinary people deserved ordinary happiness. Not much to ask for when you truly consider it. Food on the table, a roof overhead, work that pays fairly, children who might live better lives than their parents' basic human dignity. But for most of human history, even that much was too much to hope for. Now it is the minimum people expect. That is actually extraordinary. You bank the fire and prepare for bed, ensuring the doors are latched, the windows shuttered against the cold. Small precautions against predictable problems. The kind of ordinary vigilance that is possible when you are not constantly watching for plague or famine or violent social upheaval. When the world makes enough sense that planning ahead actually works. Your bed is warm. The blankets are wool, well made, purchased rather than inherited. Your house is solid, properly constructed, chosen rather than assigned. These are not exactly luxuries, but they are comforts, indicators of a life lived with some degree of control over circumstances. As you settle into sleep, you reflect on tomorrow market day in the next village. You will sell grain, purchase supplies, perhaps stop by the inn for ale and conversation with other farmers. Ordinary plans, normal expectations, the kind of unremarkable day-to-day existence that is only possible when society is not collapsing around your ears. The Black Death ended 50 years ago. The rebellion failed 30 years ago. But somehow, the world they left behind became the world you always hoped for. Not perfect, not equal, not fair in any absolute sense, but better. Measurably, undeniably better. And that, as you drift off to sleep in a house you own, in a bed you chose, in a life you built through your own decisions and efforts, that is enough. More than enough. It is everything, really. The future, whatever it brings, belongs to people like you now. People who work for a living. People who think for themselves. People who expect tomorrow to be at least as good as today and are willing to labor to make it happen. That is the Black Death's most unexpected gift. Not the ending it brought, but the beginning it made possible. The beginning of a world where ordinary people matter. Where you matter. Where your story, this story, becomes part of something larger than any individual life, but made meaningful by the sum of all individual choices. Sleep comes easily in such a world. Dream peacefully in such a time. Tomorrow will be better. Not perfect, but better. And that is revolution enough for anyone.